My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 35 years old, born and raised in a quiet Pennsylvania town, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and secrets never stay buried for long. I never thought my mother's passing would lead me here, sitting in a dim county courthouse, waiting for the reading of her will. The air was heavy with the smell of old wood and paper, the kind that carries generations of whispered disputes. My brother David sat across from me, jaw tight, eyes burning with something between grief and resentment. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Today, silence was no longer an option. The judge adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and nodded to my mother's attorney, Mr. Lawrence. He carried a slim leather folder, the kind I had seen him clutch at family events. Always too polite, always too distant. He began reading the legal phrases I'd heard only in movies: being of sound mind, last will and testament. His words echoed in the hollow room, each syllable weighing down on my chest. For a while, it was predictable. Small donations to the local church, heirlooms promised to distant cousins, even a sum set aside for the community library, where Mom had volunteered every Saturday. Then Mr. Lawrence paused, his eyes flicking toward me, then David. His voice grew sharper. To my daughter, Sarah Whitmore, I leave the contents of my private journals to be opened only in her presence. The words struck like a thunderclap. David shot up from his chair, his voice slicing through the room. Journals? What journals? This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve anything more than I do. The judge raised a hand, warning him to sit. I sat frozen, staring at the attorney as he produced a worn, cloth-bound notebook from a locked briefcase. Its faded blue cover, corners frayed, looked nothing like the polished legal documents scattered on the table. It was my mother's handwriting across the front, delicate cursive spelling, only one word: truth. David sneered. Of course. Give her some fairy tale diary. Meanwhile, the house, the land, the company. That should come to me. But I couldn't take my eyes off the journal. I remembered flashes of it from my childhood. Mom hunched at her desk late at night, the lamp casting a warm glow as she scribbled furiously, always snapping it shut if anyone walked in. I had thought it was just her way of keeping memories. Now it was in my hands, trembling, heavier than it should have been, as if carrying more than paper. The judge's gavel struck once. This court will respect the decedent's wishes. The journals belong to Sarah. Mr. Lawrence leaned closer, his voice low but firm. Your mother instructed me to tell you this, Sarah. The truth is not what it seems. Read carefully, and do not trust the silence in your own home. A chill spread across my spine. Across from me, David whispered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. She's not the angel you think she is. You'll regret opening that book. The will continued, dividing property, naming executors, but the words blurred in my ears. All I could feel was the rough cover beneath my fingertips. All I could hear was the memory of my mother's voice reading me bedtime stories, never hinting that her own story was darker than the tales she spun. When the session ended, people filtered out. David stormed past me, muttering about lawyers and favoritism, his footsteps echoing against the marble hall. I stayed behind, alone on the wooden bench, staring at the journal in my lap. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind rattled the windows, as if urging me to open it right there, right then. I didn't. I pressed it tight against my chest, knowing somehow my life had just split into two parts, before I opened that book and after. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and for as long as I can remember, my mother was never without a pen in her hand. Some children remember their mothers by the smell of a favorite perfume, the sound of a lullaby, or the warmth of a hug after a nightmare. For me, the most vivid image is of my mother sitting at the small oak desk in our living room, hunched over a notebook with pages filled edge to edge in her looping cursive. The desk lamp would cast a golden halo around her, and the scratching of her pen became the lullaby that carried me into sleep. When I was a child, I thought it was normal that every mother wrote until midnight, that every family's shelves sagged beneath the weight of journals stacked in uneven towers. She would smile when I peeked around the corner, close the book gently, and tell me, "Not yet, Sarah. Some stories are meant to be read later." At the time, I thought later meant when I was old enough to understand grown-up problems like taxes or recipes written in cursive. I never guessed she meant after her death. David, my older brother, never shared my fascination. To him, Mom's journals were clutter, nothing more. He called them scribbles, and rolled his eyes whenever she carried a new notebook home from the stationery shop downtown. "She should be paying more attention to the house than to her little stories," he muttered once, loud enough for me to hear. Mom didn't respond. She just kept writing, her face unreadable. Our house itself seemed to carry her secrets. It was a modest two-story home with white siding that always needed repainting, and windows that looked out onto a quiet street where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. But inside, it was different. The living room smelled faintly of lavender polish, and the tick of the old grandfather clock echoed like a heartbeat through the walls. I used to imagine that the whole house was alive, keeping time with us, listening to every whispered conversation. And in the center of that living world was my mother's desk, her command post, her confessional, her battlefield. When I was 15, curiosity overcame obedience. One rainy afternoon, while Mom was out grocery shopping and Dad had taken David to football practice, I crept into the living room and opened one of her journals. The first thing I noticed was how heavy it felt, far heavier than its slim frame should allow. The second was the way her words filled the page. No margins, no empty spaces, just line after line of thoughts rushing onto paper. I expected recipes or maybe musings about the weather. Instead, I found something stranger. The entry was dated April 3rd, 1999. It began innocently enough. "He came by again today. Same warning, same fear in his eyes." My heart pounded as I read on. The words became darker, mentions of the agreement, keeping quiet, and a single initial, H. Halfway down the page, the lines turned into a code. Letters scrambled, sentences broken, symbols I didn't understand. At the bottom, one phrase stood out in clear handwriting. "The children must never know, not until it's safe." I remember snapping the book shut so fast that my fingers hurt. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy cover, pale and frightened. Who was he? What agreement? And why must the children never know? I shoved the journal back where I'd found it, convinced my mother would somehow see the guilt in my eyes the moment she returned. When she came home, grocery bags heavy with bread and apples, she looked at me once, longer than usual. It was as if she sensed something, though she said nothing. Instead, she patted my shoulder, carried the bags to the kitchen, and began humming softly to herself. But that night, when I tiptoed past her desk, I noticed something. The journal I had opened was no longer on the shelf. It was gone, hidden. From then on, I never dared touch her notebooks again. Yet the image of that single page haunted me, tucked away in the corners of my mind. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the code, exaggerated the fear in her words. After all, wasn't my mother just a small-town woman, a librarian who baked pies for the church bake sale and volunteered at the school fair? She couldn't possibly have been living a double life. And yet, there were other moments that didn't quite fit the picture of an ordinary life. Times when the phone would ring late at night and she would slip into the laundry room to answer in hushed tones. Times when men in dark suits came to the house, speaking quietly with her in the driveway, while Dad and David were away. I once asked her who they were, and she brushed it off as friends from the library board. But their cars were too expensive, their shoes too polished, their expressions too grave. Now, holding the diary in my hands years later, in that courthouse, I realized the truth. My mother had been preparing me for this moment all along. She had known that one day her words would matter more than her presence, that her journals would carry the weight of proof, memory, and revelation. The first page of the book in my lap was blank. But in the corner, written so faintly I almost missed it, was a note in pencil. Sarah, start where the silence begins. I stared at it for a long time, shivers crawling down my arms. The silence begins where? In our house? In our family? In the town itself? David's words echoed in my ears from earlier in court. She's not the angel you think she is. For the first time in my life, I wondered if my mother had been more than just a woman with a love for words. Maybe she had been fighting a battle no one else could see. And maybe, just maybe, I was about to inherit not just her house or her belongings, but her secrets and her enemies. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and 3 nights after the will reading, I finally dared to open my mother's diary. For days, I had kept it locked inside the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, as if the heavy wood could protect me from the weight of her words. But sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting across that cover, truth, mocking me, daring me. The house was silent when I lit the old lamp on my nightstand. Its yellow glow spilled across the page as I cracked the cover open. The first page was still blank, but I remembered the faint note at the bottom. Start where the silence begins. I flipped through slowly. Dozens of pages, each filled with my mother's careful penmanship, some neat and flowing, others rushed and jagged as if written in panic. At first the words seemed ordinary. Shopping lists, chores, reminders about community events. But then, halfway through the book, I noticed a sudden change. Lines shortened, phrases broke mid-sentence, and strange markings appeared in the margins. Circles, arrows, even small stars drawn next to certain names. One name kept repeating, H, always just the initial. Sometimes alone, sometimes inside a sentence. H insists it must remain hidden. H said the silence is safer. I traced the letter with my finger, whispering it aloud. H, who was he? Or was it even a person? Turning another page, I froze. This one was different. The entire entry was written in code, strings of letters that made no sense, random capitals, inverted words. I thought it was nonsense until I noticed a pattern. Every third letter spells something faintly recognizable. I scribbled it out on a scrap of paper, my hands trembling. Slowly, a phrase took shape. The house hides more than memories. My heart thudded in my chest. I looked around my room as if expecting the walls themselves to shift. The house hides more than memories. What was she trying to tell me? I spent hours that night trying to crack the rest of the code. Some lines revealed fragments. Basement door, trust no one, ledger beneath. Others were harder, as if she had changed her method midway through, switching from simple substitution to something far more complex. But one line, clearer than the rest, chilled me. If Sarah finds this, it means the silence has been broken. I dropped the pen. My breath caught in my throat. She had written it for me, knowing one day I would sit exactly where I was, piecing together her secrets in the dead of night. The following morning, David barged into the house unannounced. His voice carried through the hallway, sharp and impatient. Still reading bedtime stories, Sarah? You think those journals make you special? He spotted the diary on the kitchen table where I'd left it. His eyes narrowed. You really believe Mom left you the key to something? She was sick. She wrote nonsense. I pulled the book toward me instinctively. She wasn't sick. And these aren't nonsense. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. You don't get it, do you? Mom was hiding things she didn't want anyone to know. If you keep digging, you'll regret it. There was something in his tone, fear disguised as anger. For the first time, I wondered if David already knew more than he admitted. Before I could respond, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That night, I returned to the journal with renewed determination. I remembered Mom's note. Start where the silence begins. Silence. The basement. That was always the quietest part of the house, the place Mom never let us play in as kids. She kept it locked, saying it was unsafe, full of tools and old furniture. But maybe there was another reason. I gathered a flashlight and the brass key ring I'd inherited from her desk. My hands shook as I fit the key into the rusty basement lock. The door creaked open, groaning like something alive. The air that rose from the stairwell was thick with dust and the faint smell of mold, untouched for years. Step by step I descended, my flashlight cutting narrow beams through the darkness. Old shelves, boxes, forgotten toys. But in the far corner, beneath a sheet draped over a trunk, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Another stack of journals, bound together with twine, hidden away from the rest of the house. I dropped to my knees, untied the bundle, and opened the top notebook. Inside were entries far darker than the one I had read upstairs. Words like bribery, threat, blackmail, and always. H, the mysterious letter, appearing over and over again like a ghost whispering from the pages. And then, on the final page of the notebook, I saw a line written in hurried scrawl, underlined 3 times. If you're reading this, Sarah, know that your brother will never forgive me if the truth comes out. Be careful who you trust. The flashlight flickered in my hand. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Someone was in the house. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and that night in the basement changed everything. The bundle of hidden journals was still clutched against my chest when I heard the creak of a floorboard above me. At first, I thought it was just the house shifting in the cold, but then it came again, measured, deliberate, like footsteps trying not to be heard. I switched off my flashlight and held my breath. The blackness pressing in around me. Dust tickled my throat, threatening to betray me with a cough. I counted slowly. 1, 2, 3, then climbed the stairs as quietly as I could. The doorknob above rattled faintly, as though someone had just tested it. When I pushed the door open, the hallway was empty. The air felt disturbed, though, like the house had just exhaled after holding its breath. On the kitchen counter lay a single object that hadn't been there before. David's keychain, heavy with the gaudy silver D charm he'd carried since high school. He had been inside. He had seen me in the basement, and he had left without a word. I locked the basement door and pressed my back against it, clutching the journals tighter. If David knew what I had found, what would he do to stop me from reading further? That night, I pored over the new entries, searching for patterns. More mentions of H. More warnings written in my mother's tight, desperate scrawl. H is losing patience. They want silence, but I can't keep burying it. The children must never see him here. If David learns the truth, it will break him. I traced the words with my finger, the name David burning into my mind. What truth could possibly break him? Why did Mom single him out? The next morning, I confronted him. I found him in the driveway, leaning against his truck, smoking a cigarette like he used to when Dad yelled at him after football practice. His eyes flicked to the journals in my arms. "You should have left those where they were," he said flatly. "You were in the house last night," I shot back. "What were you looking for, David?" His jaw tightened. "For you to stop. Mom was sick, Sarah, obsessed. She filled those books with fantasies. If you keep digging, you'll only hurt yourself." I stepped closer. "Then why hide them? Why sneak around like you did?" For a moment, his mask cracked. Fear, raw and unguarded, flashed across his face. He ground the cigarette under his heel and turned away. "You think you want the truth," he muttered. "But once you have it, you'll wish you didn't." He drove off, leaving me standing in the cold morning air, clutching the journals as if they were a shield. That night, I returned to the basement. The silence felt thicker, heavier, almost oppressive. I opened another journal from the bundle, this one with a red ribbon marking a page. The entry was dated 12 years ago. H came again, He says the deal must stay buried. He left money in the black ledger, dirty money. If Robert ever finds it, everything we built will collapse. I can't let David know. He admires his father too much. Sarah, maybe one day she'll understand. I froze. Robert, my father. The man who had died 3 years ago, long before Mom. The man David had idolized, calling him his hero, his mentor, his everything. Could H have been connected to Dad? Or was Dad himself the reason these secrets existed? The word ledger pulsed in my mind. A black ledger, hidden somewhere in the house. Evidence of money, bribes, payoffs, corruption. My mother hadn't been protecting herself. She'd been protecting us. I turned another page and the writing was hurried, nearly illegible. He won't stop coming. H says the silence is safer, but silence feels like betrayal. If Sarah finds this, she must know. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. The room tilted. I had to grip the table to steady myself. My father, my steady, dependable father, wasn't the man I thought he was. Upstairs, the front door slammed. David's voice echoed through the house. Sarah, put those damn books away. I shoved the journals back into the trunk, heart hammering, and darted up the stairs. He was waiting in the hallway, face red with fury. What did you read? He demanded. Nothing you'd understand, I snapped. He stepped closer, eyes wild. You don't get to drag his name through the mud. Dad built this family, this house, everything we have. You think some scribbles in Mom's crazy notebooks changed that? I stood my ground. They're not scribbles, David. They're warnings. And you know it. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. His fists clenched, knuckles white, before he turned and punched the wall instead. The sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. He stormed out again, muttering words I couldn't catch. I sank against the wall, trembling. My mother's secrets weren't just about a mysterious H. They were about my father. And David? He already knew more than he was admitting. For several days after the confrontation with David, I felt like I was living on a powder keg. His outbursts were no longer just grief or jealousy. They carried something heavier. Beneath the anger, there was fear. And fear is harder to hide than rage. I kept going back to the journals as though they were the only source of truth my mother had left me. The more I read, the more the illusion of a perfect family collapsed. Gone were the recipes, the musings about neighbors or holiday plans. In their place were sharp entries about bribes, shadow deals, and whispered meetings. One passage stopped me cold. It was dated when I was 16. The handwriting was shaky, urgent, as if her thoughts had been racing too quickly for the pen to keep up. Hale came again. He demands silence. But Robert keeps the black ledger, every payment, every name, every date. If it is ever found, we are ruined. I cannot tell the children. David would never forgive his father, and Sarah is too young to understand. The truth rots in these walls, and one day it will come out. I pressed my palm against the ink, my heart hammering. The black ledger. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't fantasy. There was something tangible. Proof. Wedged between 2 pages, I found a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed, brittle, but still intact. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, addressed in my mother's careful hand. To the one who dares to read. If you are holding this, I could no longer speak openly. The ledger is hidden in Robert's office, beneath the floorboards of his desk. It holds every deal, every name. I begged him to stop. I begged him to tell the children the truth. But pride is stronger than love. If Sarah is the one to find this, forgive me. Protect yourself. Trust no one, not even David. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not even David. The boy who used to walk me to school, who swore he'd protect me from bullies, who once gave me his lucky coin before my exams. Our mother hadn't trusted him. Why? I slipped the letter into my pocket and kept reading. One phrase appeared again and again, like a warning echoing through time. David knows more than he admits. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I couldn't live with questions anymore. I had to see for myself if the ledger existed. That evening, armed with a flashlight and a small knife, I went into my father's old office. The air was stale, thick with dust and the faint smell of varnish. His massive desk sat in the corner, the same place where I had once seen him bent over contracts late into the night. I tapped along the floorboards, listening carefully. Most gave off a solid thud, but one spot under the desk sounded hollow. My pulse quickened. I wedged the knife between the boards and pried. The wood gave way with a reluctant groan. Beneath it lay a book, thick, heavy, bound in cracked black leather. No title, just silence. My hands shook as I lifted it out. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. Dates, sums, names. Row after row, each one damning. Construction contracts, city projects, payouts. And alongside the numbers were names I recognized. Neighbors, officials, even the pastor from our church. Everyone had taken their share. Then I saw it. A signature scrawled in bold letters. Franklin Hale. Not just an initial this time, but his full name. My stomach turned. I remembered him, the tall man in the expensive suits who used to come to the house, speaking in low tones with my father while my mother watched from the kitchen window, her face pale. It was all here. Everything my mother had hinted at. Every shadow that had hung over our family. I barely had time to close the ledger when a voice came from the doorway. "What are you doing, Sarah?" I spun around. David stood there, his face pale, his eyes locked on the book in my hands. His voice was raw, almost pleading. "You shouldn't have found that," he whispered. I clutched the ledger tighter against my chest. "This isn't just Dad's legacy, David. It's corruption. It's rot. And Mom died carrying the weight of it alone." He stepped closer, his fists trembling at his sides. "If you expose this, you'll destroy everything. The company, the family. Do you want to burn down what little we have left?" I shook my head. "The truth won't burn us, David. The lies will." For a moment he froze, torn between anger and despair. Then he slammed his fist against the doorframe, the crack echoing like a gunshot. His eyes were wild, but behind them was fear, not of me, but of the world that would unravel if this truth ever left the room. The night after I discovered the ledger, the house felt different. The walls seemed to breathe, every creak of wood sounded like a footstep, and shadows stretched too long under the dim hallway light. I carried the black book to my bedroom and locked the door behind me, sliding a chair under the knob as though that flimsy barrier could keep danger out. I sat at my desk with the ledger spread open in front of me. Every line was another nail in my father's coffin, another reason to question everything I thought I knew. And yet, what terrified me most wasn't the corruption itself. It was the network of names. These weren't small-town bribes. The list included state officials, businessmen from Philadelphia, even 2 police chiefs. The corruption reached far beyond our family. One entry stood out: payment to Hale delivered, pressure mounting, silence is survival. The words pulsed on the page: silence is survival. I closed the book, locked it in the bottom drawer, and tried to sleep. But at 3 a.m, a sound dragged me from a restless dream: the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart froze. I lived on a quiet street where no one visited at that hour. I crept to the window, pulling back the curtain. A black sedan idled in front of the house. Its headlights were off. I couldn't see the driver, only the faint glow of a cigarette ember inside. The car stayed there for 10 minutes, engine humming softly, before finally pulling away into the night. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing: delivery, wrong address, paranoia. But when I stepped onto the porch, I found an envelope tucked under the doormat. My name, Sarah, written in thick black marker. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words, printed in block letters: "Put it back Now. My knees nearly buckled. Someone knew. Someone was watching. I rushed back inside, locking the door and clutching the note with shaking hands. David was the only one who could have tipped them off. He had seen me with the ledger, and his panic yesterday wasn't just about family shame. It was about the people who stood behind these deals. People who clearly didn't want their names exposed. I called him, my voice trembling. "What did you do, David?" He sighed heavily on the other end. "I warned you, Sarah. You weren't supposed to touch that book." "You told them, didn't you?" I hissed. A long silence. Then quietly, "I didn't have a choice." The betrayal stung more than the threat itself. My own brother had handed me over, like I was just another liability to be managed. That evening, I checked the basement again, desperate for answers. Beneath the trunk where I had found the bundle of journals, I noticed another loose board. Pulling it up, I discovered a small metal tin, rusted around the edges. Inside were faded photographs. My father shaking hands with Franklin Hale, envelopes passing between them. In one picture, Hale's hand rested on David's shoulder. My brother couldn't have been older than 20. His eyes were wide, uncertain, caught between admiration and fear. So David had been part of this longer than I realized. Not just aware, but involved. I sat on the basement floor, photos spread out around me, the tin in my lap. My hands shook with rage and dread. The ledger was one thing, it was evidence. But these pictures were undeniable proof. Proof that my father, Hale, and even David were all entangled in the same web. Upstairs, the phone rang. I raced to answer, heart pounding. A deep male voice came through, calm, deliberate. "You've read too much already, Miss Whitmore." "Who is this?" I demanded, though I already knew. "You don't need to know who I am." You only need to understand this. The ledger is not yours to keep. If you care about what little family you have left, put it back where you found it. Tonight. The line went dead. I stood frozen, the receiver pressed to my ear, the photographs scattered across the basement floor. The message was clear. I wasn't just poking at old family wounds anymore. I was trespassing into a world that punished curiosity with silence. Permanent silence. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ledger. Every instinct told me to burn it, to hide it, to erase every trace. But another voice inside me, the voice of my mother, whispered just as fiercely, "The truth rots in these walls. One day it will come out." I wasn't ready to be silent. Not yet. The morning after the threatening phone call, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my hands unsteady. Fear had settled in me like poison. But beneath it was something stronger. Defiance. If I gave the ledger back, if I stayed quiet, then my mother's voice, every word she had written in those journals, would die with her. And I couldn't let that happen. I packed the ledger and the photographs into a backpack and drove across town to the only person I thought I could trust, Frank Williams, my father's former business partner and my godfather. He'd been around since before I could walk, a constant figure at family dinners and holiday parties. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. When he opened the door, his face softened. "Sarah, you look like you haven't slept in days." I stepped inside, lowering my voice. "I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you'll be honest." In his living room, I spread the photographs across the coffee table and placed the ledger beside them. Frank stared at the evidence for a long time, his jaw tightening. His hands, once steady as stone, trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Finally, he looked up at me, eyes heavy with something between sorrow and resignation. "So, you found it." My stomach dropped. "You knew?" He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Sarah, there are things about your father. Things he got himself into that I tried to stop. But Hale had his hooks deep in him. Once you were in, you didn't get out, not without consequences. Consequences like what? I demanded. Frank hesitated. Accidents, bankruptcies, families ruined, people disappeared. Hale didn't just bribe, he controlled. And your father, God help him, made his choice. I stayed as far away as I could, but even I signed things I shouldn't have. I thought if I kept my distance, I'd be safe. But Hale doesn't forget. His confession made my blood run cold. My father hadn't been a victim. He'd been a willing participant. I pressed him harder. What about David? Did you know he was involved? Frank's silence was answer enough. Before he could explain further, headlights swept across the window. A car slowed in front of the house. My heart lurched. Frank's face went pale. They're watching you, he whispered. You shouldn't have come here. The car didn't stop. It rolled slowly past, but the message was clear. They knew where I was. They knew what I carried. Frank leaned forward, his voice urgent. Sarah, listen to me. You can't keep that ledger in the house. They'll come for it. You need to get it out of town, somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look. Safe where? I asked, panic rising. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Your mother trusted the church. The old library beneath the chapel, she used to volunteer there because she knew no one would suspect. Hide it there, at least until you decide what to do with it. I nodded, clutching the ledger close, but as I turned to leave, Frank grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, his eyes deadly serious. Be careful who you tell. And Sarah, if Hale knows you have this, you're already in more danger than you realize. I drove home with trembling hands, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Once, I thought I saw the same black sedan from the night before trailing a few cars behind me. My chest tightened until I finally pulled into my driveway and saw nothing but empty street. Inside, the phone was ringing. I hesitated, then picked it up. Sarah! It was David's voice, low and urgent. You need to stop, right now. You're digging into things you don't understand. I understand enough, I snapped. Dad was dirty. Hale owned him, and you've known all along. You don't get it, he said, his voice cracking. Hale isn't someone you expose. He's someone you survive. Put the book back before it's too late. His words were decisive.